What's up, squad? This is Brendan from the Bantu Sun. Thank you so much for joining me today. There has been a recent data release of global private jet traffic travel pretty much around the world by VistaJet. And it's really interesting because they did release some broad themes of travel. And I thought it was very insightful to see where certain destinations to and from have grown over the past year. So I'm going to list down their major routes that have increased. And then I'll go into a little bit to say what I believe is going on in a larger geopolitical point of view. So, in order of highest growth to least, is Africa to Asia is up 42%, Middle East to North America is up 28%, South America to Europe up 28%, North America to Africa up 26%, Asia to Middle East up 20%, and Europe to Middle East up 17%. So, one of the first things that this really brings to my mind is what's included and what's not included. And clearly, what's not really included is Latin South America travel being kind of mentioned with South America to Europe leg, and then also the Africa component. Now, Latin America, South America has always struggled a little bit for growth. They don't have this large productivity growth, such as Asia, or a large demographic push, such as Africa. And they have struggled to really integrate into the world for a lot of regions. You can say from government or bureaucracy, etc., but it hasn't been a major push. And even now, when you look at the biggest behemoth of the region of South America, Brazil, President Da Silva is usually, last time I see him, he's usually talking about America, and he's kind of making himself the political rival of the United States on the global stage. But you're not seeing them push for economic development. They had a big deal with Europe, but a lot of that was Europeans going to Brazil. And that's really what I'm looking at. Who's going from where to where? Because the people that take the trip from destination, that's the destination that they're seeking something, and the to destination is where they think they'll find it. So when I see that the only reference for South America is to Europe, not Europe to South America, it makes me think these South Americans are ensuring capital investments from Europe. They're trying to secure manufacturing deals, or they're trying to secure markets with their raw materials, as opposed to Europeans going to South Americans being a high growth sector. And that would, to me, signify that Europeans see a great opportunity in South America that they want to capitalize on. So I think that really is not a great omen for South America, not seeing where that growth is going to come from. And it really looks like an extractive economy at this point of view. And I can say the same thing for Africa. It's unfortunate because Africa is one of the great demographic booms of the next 50 to 100 years. And I'm not seeing where the growth, sovereignty, empowerment, development is going to come from, especially when it comes to sub-Saharan Africa. Because what you're seeing is not Asia to Africa, but you're seeing the trips that are increasing is on that leg from Africa to Asia. And it has increased exponentially, which means these are Africans seeking to obtain manufacturing partnerships, markets, or trades. As you can see, the Chinese just offer all of Africa free trade, which basically means uh, the Chinese want African resources at pretty much a discount or as base price, and they're not really intimidated by African manufacturer and industrial goods coming in and securing market share within China, which is a great opportunity for Africa. But it also says how little respect the Chinese have for African competition on the industrial scale. I received a question, and I thought it would be a great time to answer that question from infamous Austin, who says, "Could the next world war start over conflict in Africa, as you have the Middle Eastern states, me having the Middle Eastern states trying to be players there, France, Europe, trying to maintain some level of control in the region, and then the big three, U.S., Russia, China, trying to be dominant players there." The role I'm seeing for Africa right now is that as a canary in the coal mine. It's symbolic of something larger that's happening, similar to the role that Africa played in the 19th and 20th century. When you saw colonialism played out, the kind of the looking glass for that was in Africa. Remember early on with exploration, there were countries like Sweden, the Danes participating in colonialism, going out to sea, but they were never able to maintain their bases overseas, and they lost those quickly because they couldn't compete with the stronger powers such as England and France. And what happened in Africa? Africa became symbolic of the broader geopolitical themes of Europe. As Germany rose, Germany asserted its presence in Africa and Namibia and Tanzania, Cameroon. But as Germany got beat down in World War One, what happened? Africa became a UK France situation. Now, this is what's going to happen now. I think I'm not seeing a domestic power source develop within inside of Africa because Africa isn't integrated enough. It's not developed enough, and it seems to be too extractive at this point. And that's not mentioning some of the moves that I'm noticing. Dangote of Nigeria trying to make Africa more of a refining center. There's some moves of African countries trying to increase refinement, industrialization, and hey, it may come, but right now, you're not seeing a real big, strong, dominant player that you can see can go into these African countries and develop indigenous source of power. And so, therefore, it's a playground for countries of Europe, for China, for India. On this list of trips, the United States is going to Africa. That's increasing. North America to Africa. Now, it says North America. It's a lot of mining companies, so that can include Canada. There's a lot of Canadian mining companies in West Africa. But and I know President Trump talks about the Congo. He's kind of licking his chops at that. But this is still a continent he hasn't visited. And I don't think, and it's not outside of slavery, the United States really hasn't really had a need for African countries. It's always been something that needs to be managed. Africa is a quagmire, especially when you get into sub-Saharan Africa. It's the reason why it was called the Dark Continent. It's almost impenetrable. And until it gets that internal network and infrastructure that's required to bring it to this justified level of influence and development, it's going to continue to be extractive. It's going to continually be retailed parcel because it is not integrated enough. So what other countries are doing, they're finding opportunities where they can come in, get what they need, and get the heck out. The same way the Europeans put the rail next to the mine to the port and got the heck out. Africa, because of its the depth, the jungles, the demographics, is hard to penetrate in a meaningful way. So I still find it amazing that so many European languages were able to penetrate Africa. So it is a very difficult terrain, and you really got to commit. And does Africa really offer that ROI right now? America, for example, United States can get so many of the goods from Southeast Asia, or they have it themselves, such as oil, or from South America. So yeah, I think Africa is critical. I think Africa is the center of the world. I think it's critical for Europe and the Middle East. But those relationships haven't truly developed. They're getting there in some countries, but Africa really hasn't shown it's in charge of its own destiny right now. And I don't think anybody wants to fight on African soil against another power. Even in World War II, the soft underbelly, there was wars in North Africa between the Germans and the Allies, but that was just to get to the soft underbelly of Italy. So when you're talking about sub-Saharan Africa, the predominant area of Africa, that's a whole different beast. There's a lot of things going on left to the experts, and I'm talking about countries like the UAE and Europe. So, do I think it's going to be a war in Africa? No, because I don't think Africa is critical. Excuse me. I don't think Africa is going to be critical for any major power at this stage of the game. Another thing this makes me bring up is obviously the Middle East. This is mentioned a couple times, the Middle East going to North America, which I think is kind of the Gulf states looking to get that investment. America's still top tier technologically, still have great businesses to invest in, capital resources, industry. These are things, defense, these are all things that the Middle East will struggle with, but they got a lot of cash to remedy, and the solution would be the United States. You also see Europeans and Asians going to the Middle East. So all this basically say is the Middle East is the central quarter of the world right now. I want to say Asia is the center of the world, but the intermediary, the key interlocutor is the Middle East. And it's primarily between Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and Abu Dhabi, UAE, or the UAE in whole. Typically, these countries have been together and provided a united front. But now they got a civil war tiff going on, a Cold War, you will say, but they have a tiff going on, and they're at odds at a lot of issues. And what UAE has done is kind of position itself kind of as like a Switzerland of Africa. UAE has always been able to hide, I'll say, for a geographic point of view, behind Big Brother of Saudi Arabia. And the UAE has had a lot of benefit of doing so and kind of has appeared to be like a duck, cool on the surface, but beneath the surface, their feet are going crazy. And they've been doing a lot of moves behind the scene. But now, since they've come to a tiff with the Saudi Arabia, you're now starting to see the UAE more exposed in all of the things that they're doing strategically, geostrategically. Whether you're talking about Libya, Yemen, um, Ethiopia, RSF, and Sudan, et cetera, deals with Israel, and UAE no longer have that cool cover of Saudi Arabia because Saudi Arabia is not shielding them anymore. Saudi Arabia is starting to see them as a competitor. I also think, but the Middle East is key in connecting Asia, Africa, and Europe. You can't escape them. And the energy resources they have, their geography is one reason, but it's also the key. Oil and gas is not going anywhere anytime soon. They are pretty much benchmarks and linchpins of the global economic system. This is a highly very valuable region. Now, as I said, the competition is coming in this region between Riyadh and Abu Dhabi, or Saudi Arabia and the UAE. But I do think there's a black sheep for all of you geostrategic nerds out there. I do think it's a black sheep of Iraq, who has just as much more oil reserves as UAE, not as much as Saudi Arabia as well. But because of the split between Saudi Arabia and UAE, you have kind of Iraq, which has a population more than both of these guys combined. Great central force as well. Sumer, the beginning of civilization, cradle of civilization, Tiger Euphrates. This is Iraq. So Iraq geography hasn't changed. This is why we do geopolitics. The geography hasn't changed. Iraq is going through a lot right now, political issues, dealing with terrorism, trying to get sovereignty within inside its borders. They've had to deal with a lot of issues, but they have a great latent potential to rival these Gulf states if they ever got their act together. But like I said, it's a black sheep. It's a black sheep. But Iraq wouldn't be surprised in 30, 40 years if Saudi Arabia, if Iraq was a major global player, the key interlocutor, as opposed to Saudi Arabia and UAE, primarily driven by its geographic centrality as well as its demographic heft. But for now, Saudi Arabia, UAE, centers of the world as far as being intermediaries, interlocutors. And UAE in the Middle East is going nowhere soon because of this region. As you see, it's Asia, the Middle East is up. This means the Asians are going to the Middle East to secure. They're looking for something that the Middle East can solve for them, a problem that the Middle East can solve for them. And whether you're talking about demographic migration pressures on Europe that Middle East is affecting, whether you're talking about Islamic extremists in the Sahel that the Middle East is affecting, or whether you're talking about key critical energy routes to the east, such as the Straits of Hormuz, that the Middle East is affecting. The Middle East is critical in the old global order and in the new global order. So, moving on to that, another thing that really stuck out to me is how we see China geostrategically. When I'm looking at this, there's this triangle, right, between South Asia, primarily India, East Asia, primarily China, and Southeast Asia, ASEAN, right? And this is relatively, I would say, energy poor region of the world, but it's intense consumption, intense productivity. And I think this is an iron sharpens iron environment that's going to drive a lot of innovation, technological growth, and development. And it's going to be a great benefit to this region as they consume, but it's also going to be a risk to the outside world because they're going to be on the outs. Long for the longest, America has been the center of development and excellence. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how they maintain this in a world where the center of the world is no longer the North Atlantic between the United States and Europe, but now it's going to be Southeast Asia, where you have China, ASEAN, and India converging. And this is going to be a resource pool on the region, and that places like Australia, South America, and Africa, Middle East are going to benefit from. But it can be a danger. And I only see America being able to maintain its competitive edge through trade and immigration, which are two words that are really not popular under the current MAGA administration. So it's going to be interesting how America is going to be able to try to maintain that level of supremacy in the world. And I think it's going to be hard, if not impossible, to do without alliances. Secondly, when I look at the map and I look at these trends, is China is really in a very vulnerable geopolitical situation. They really need the world. Like, don't get me wrong, at home, China are industrial animals. They are machines. They can make anything and they can make it affordable and fast. And they're only getting better every day. They're getting quicker and they're going up the technological chain. The problem is a lot of the things they need to go into the ocean to procure, especially when it comes to energy. And they're hemmed into the south by the South China Seas and all the countries in Southeast Asia. They hemmed in to the east by Japan. They hemmed in from the Arctic in the north by Russia, to the west by India. And these are not open hostilities, but what I am saying that if they have an issue with Russia or United States or with Vietnam or the Philippines or with India, it can cause a critical flaw in their current system. The way China has advanced is, and it's antithetical to how the old colonies or colonial empires advanced. When you had Europe advancing, it was all about tick for tat. Like, we want this port or we want this territory. They go to war, they make concessions. Okay, I'll give you Cape Town, South Africa, but you give me Singapore, right? There was trade-offs, and it was different trade-offs between these countries that they went to war, securing key strategic points. This is very confrontational. China has shown itself that it's not for the foreign wars. So what China has done is they have taken low hanging fruit, whether that's their early relationship with Pakistan, one of their greatest, if not their greatest ally, whether that's development in South America and Africa. China's going in areas that they're not being contested in, and they're making those relationships work. The problem is that they're very disconjointed and they vary across the globe. And this has really opened up China for a time of distress. And right now, China has been able to maintain a symbiotic relationship with the United States. But you have to wonder, how long is China going to be in this vulnerable position until they assert their needs? For instance, a country like Australia would be a great ally for China. It has a lot of land, a lot of resources that China needs, a lot of agricultural land that China needs and productivity. It's the ideal location, but Australia is thoroughly embedded in the Western infrastructure. So what does China have to do when they look at things like lithium or copper? They feel more comfortable going all the way to South America than they do talking to their Australian neighbor. And in a time of conflict and war, that's just not sustainable. There's no way China is going to be able to rely on the Western Hemisphere if they have a conflict with the United States. So I expect to see things like that. And this is also, though, conversely, this is also why Australia and the United States get really nervous when they see China start to make deals in offset islands in Polynesia or Melanesia, such as China trying to talk to New Caledonia off the Australian coast, because they know that China really needs this Oceania area, and they need to come in, but the Chinese do not want direct conflict. So they'll go, and if they feel a little heat, they'll step away from that region. And you have to wonder how long that's going to last until China say, "Hey, this is my sphere of influence. United States, you want to go take our oil partner in Venezuela away from us because it's in your sphere of influence?" Well, we have to do the same thing at home. And there's going to be some canary in coal mines on that one, whether that's talking about a close relationship with Japan, which will be phenomenal for China. But it takes a lot of humility for that relationship to work. Whether that's to be the acquisition of Taiwan, um, we'll see what deal they can work with the Russians for access to the Arctic. But I just think China is really exposed globally. And in peacetime, it works, but all times aren't going to be like that. So be on the lookout for that. Another thing I thought was interesting as I looked through the various the routes and how this is all coming together is what's next for Europe and Russia. This Ukraine situation is bleeding Europe badly. And one has to go, right? Either Putin has to go or Zelensky has to go. And the European scene did set on taking down the Putin administration. So it's going to be really interesting to see how long European and Russian is going to sit there idly as the world is shifting beneath their feet while they're in contention with each other in Ukraine. So that was just a rundown. I thought those flights were interesting. I thought they revealed some of the wider geopolitical shifts that I've been noticing. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Comment below, like, share, subscribe if you enjoyed the content. Until next time, take care. Bantu up.